Thank you, Imelda. Good morning. Buenos dias, CABE. I took some high school French, and I think it's bonjour. Bon anniversaire. Took some Chinese too. Juni Shengri Kuai Le, CABE. Happy birthday, CABE. What a great honor it is to stand on this stage with the speakers that have just preceded. Our Assembly Speaker, Superintendent Finnell, Vice Chancellor Gonzalez, our civil rights leaders, pioneers, Ling-Chi Wang, good to see you again. Ed Steinman, thank you for the work that you did more than 40 years ago and have continued to do. And as the speakers have all said, this is a struggle. We have to be fighters, right? We need to show that bilingualism, multiculturalism, multilingualism, these are the rights of students. And in fact, during the past 40 years, the world has changed. Those states, those districts, those classrooms where students are learning 2 languages, maybe even 3 languages, whoever gets there first will have a real comparative advantage compared to the rest of the world. I hope the United States is getting there. There's some good signs that this is now being perceived as something that's important for a 21st century education. But you know this, as you go around the world, there is no doubt in other countries that they want their students to learn other languages. That in fact, they believe students can learn 2, 3, 4 languages. So we need to bring that knowledge, that expertise here to this country as well. We've got some great new ways of doing it. I'm sure you're all familiar that technology has also changed and brought us new ways of learning, and that's my message today. Maybe it was a little more difficult to learn a second language, a third language decades ago, but now technology and the world have changed to give us this new learning landscape, this way of presenting content in languages and culture, in STEM, in ways that are so much more engaging that kids can learn more earlier and learn more quickly than we were able to do in decades previous. And I'm so pleased that CABE is using technology, the Facebook, the Twitter. And I'm just curious, I know many of you are very technology savvy, but how many of you are not using Facebook and Twitter? If you could just raise your hands, a few of you. Yeah, there's a few of you left. Yeah, that's good. It's okay. Not to worry, because I'm working on a new social media platform that's going to make it much easier. It's going to combine the best features of Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. It's going to be so easy to use. It's going to be called UTwitFace. It's going to bring it all together. It's going to be absolutely free. You're going to love it. I wish I were kidding. Let me just tell you a little bit about my own learning journey to be here with you today. I consider myself very fortunate to be the son of Chinese immigrants. I never really used the word refugee to talk about my parents, but in fact, that's what they were. My parents were the only ones to come out of China in their families. They came out in a little window. If you remember, I'm glad we had a little history lesson here today, but there's a little window between 45 and 49. At the end of World War II, China was the ally. Remember that history, fighting the Japanese? My father was able to come to the US and study. A little civil war broke out in China between 45 and 49. My mother came in 49. And on the boat from Hong Kong to San Francisco, they got a little telegram that said, good news, the Civil War's over. There's going to be this new country with a new name. It's going to be called the People's Republic of China. And everybody on that boat didn't quite understand what that would mean, but what that did mean was that little window that was open between the US and China kind of closed. China and the US became enemies for decades, and it meant that my parents could never go home again. And they never did for 30 years. So I've been very fortunate to grow up in this country, to get an education, to be able to work in education, especially work in innovations in education. If you see this slide, This is a slide of me standing on the Great Wall about 30 years later, early 80s. Do you see me there? My hair is a little longer, and not as much gray hair there. I'm standing next to an 8-foot-tall yellow canary. We are working on a production called Big Bird in China. It was aired in the early 80s. It was one of the first efforts to bring together through media the US and China, and that has just continued over the past 30 years. I've been very fortunate to also work in a galaxy long ago and far, far away. So on both coasts, working for Sesame Workshop, and then here in California, the George Lucas Educational Foundation. I know some of you must be Star Wars fans. I'm glad that there will be a December coming to a theater near you. Those of you who are true Star Wars fans will say, December? It should be May, right? It should be Memorial Day. That's Star Wars weekend. So here's one reason why I think we are looking out over this new learning landscape. This is a TED Talk from Clay Shirky, an NYU futurist. And he says, think about it. We are living in the age of the greatest expansion of human creativity ever in the history of humankind. We have now ways of kids, all of us, communicating, creating, and sharing through platforms such as Facebook and Twitter in a way that was never possible before. Clay Shirky says, think about it. Every medium we've ever created for communicating, for telling stories, text and writing, song. That's how we communicated before Gutenberg did that thing with the printing press. We used to dance and sing to communicate. Photos, video. He pulls out his smartphone, and you all have one now. Every medium is right next to every other medium right here on this device that you're carrying with you in your pockets and your purses. If we could understand how to harness this power for children's creativity, for their ability to tell their stories, then we would have truly arrived at a 21st century education. Why is this here? One figure I used to track was YouTube and how long it took for 24 hours, an entire day's worth of video to be uploaded to the YouTube site. When I first started talking about this about 5 years ago, it used to take about 5 minutes. In just 5 minutes, 24 hours of video would be uploaded to YouTube. People around the world sharing their stories. Now it's down to about 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, people are uploading 24 hours of video to YouTube. Now people say to me, you know, Milton, not everything on YouTube is educational. I'm aware, but this is one of my favorite educational YouTube videos. Did you know that you could train your cat to use the toilet? I'm being only half facetious here because I was going around talking with audiences. How many of you have ever used YouTube to learn something? Just raise your hands. Look at that. Just yell out a few things that you've used YouTube for in your own learning. Just plumbing, fixing a car, dancing, cooking. Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it? Some people often say they learn another language. Lots of hobbies, lots of home repair. This is the age we're living in. And this is what's now possible for our students. So there's our Edutopia website. We have more than 1 million visitors to edutopia.org every month. National Pie Day is coming up. Who doesn't love pie? What is pie? I mean P-I. On The Simpsons, the fellow who runs the Quickie Mart on The Simpsons, he says, you know, I can calculate pi out to 100 figures. And Homer Simpson says, pie. I don't mean that kind of pie. Did you know that if you look at this image of a pie, pi is the ratio of the circumference of the circle to its diameter. No matter what size that circle is, It's always 3.1415. So, National Pi Day is coming up, and it's a great National Pi Day because 3.1415 is March 14th, 2015. I think it'd be great if educators or part of CABE said, we think mathematics is important, and bilingualism and biculturalism. We embrace STEM, we embrace mathematics. Let's celebrate National Pi Day on March 15th. Have some lessons around that in 2 different languages. That would be fantastic. Sal Khan Academy, just like YouTube, an amazing platform for learning all sorts of things that started with mathematics, but is now lessons in science, lessons in history, what one person, Sal Khan, did starting just 10 years ago, doodling little lessons for his younger niece, his younger cousin, has become Khan Academy. I know you're using it in your classrooms with your schools and districts. Here's another thing that's coming down the road. Here we are in California, the home of digital entertainment. San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, all these companies, Pixar, Electronic Arts, Lucasfilm, Disney. We are the home of digital entertainment. But there are many kids out there who would love to work in this industry, who don't see the path from where they are, sitting in 5th grade, son or daughter of immigrants from Latin America, from Asia. They love art. They love to do something related to digital entertainment. They don't see the pathway. This year, if you want to show that Khan Academy piece again, that slide of Sal, Pixar has thought about this. And this is another example of the way in which companies are embracing education and saying, we need to be a bigger part of schooling and show a different way of educating kids. Coming to Khan Academy this year, a Pixar feature called Pixar in a Box that will show how animators use science and mathematics in animating figures. I saw a first lesson about this. A young animator comes on, and who wouldn't want to be like him? He's working at Pixar, he's working on the latest cars or planes. He says, here's what we do at Pixar. In one scene, we're going to animate a field of grass. Look at a single blade of grass. It's a little thinner at the ends and a little thicker in the middle. That's a parabola. Let's look at the formula for a parabola. Let's vary some of the factors in that equation, and as we vary that, the blade of grass gets taller and it gets wider, and you can do that with this new tool called Pixar in a Box. Anyway, just another example of the way in which we can now bring all kids to higher levels of learning and help them achieve their dreams. The maker movement, another great example. 3D printers that are now coming into our schools, that are available to kids in libraries and museums to be able to create, design, and make things. Here's a kid from the Central Coast of California. Young Quinn, he's 13 years old. He was lucky to be born in the right family because his parents took him to the Maker Faire in San Mateo. Please come to the Maker Faire if you want to see some of this. I think it's coming up in May. When he was 10 years old, his parents took him to the Maker Faire, and he saw some of this work. There you see he has designed and created and printed a rubber smartphone holder with his name. In this film, I won't show it to you today, in this film, he is teaching other kids, and importantly, his school district heard about the work he was doing. And the superintendent in that film says, we asked Quinn to come and teach us. We as a school board, as the administrators for this district, want to know what is this new kind of learning that we're all looking at now? What is this new learning landscape where 13-year-olds can design and make things? So Quinn is teaching his district, and I'm sure you have many students like him in your classes as well. I wrote a book called Education Nation about 6 leading edges of innovation in our schools. In it, I talked about we won't truly become an education nation until we do things like what Singapore and Taiwan have done. When they created new currency, printed new currency, they found images of what they want to represent themselves as a nation. Images of children learning, images with teachers. If you ever go to Taiwan or Singapore, you'll see these bills. Look at what's on our currency. I hope someday, imagine that conversation in the highest levels of the Singapore government or the Taiwan government. We have this chance to create new currency. What are the images we want to put on it? Hopefully someday in this country there will be that conversation as well. What are the images we want to show to ourselves of what we represent? These edges of innovation, I'll quickly run through them. The most important one, I think you're familiar with the idea of new curriculum, new forms of assessment. I've mentioned some of the ways in which we can change the curriculum. The role of technology, 3D printing, access to the internet, these platforms. Learning time and place. Did you know the United States has one of the shortest school years of any industrialized country? No wonder. No wonder. Our kids don't have enough learning time, and they don't have the opportunities to get into different learning places. The classroom is a very important learning place. So are places in the community where they can learn. I've been working with the national parks about getting kids into authentic learning places, the most significant places in our nation where they can learn about history, they can learn about culture, they can learn about climate change. The idea of co-teaching and co-learning. Students teaching each other. We now call that collaborative learning, don't we? Back when I was in school, you were told to do your own work. Do not talk to other students. Do not share what your work is with other students. Back then we called it cheating. Now we call it collaborative learning. Just another example of the way in which the world has changed, our understanding of how to educate kids has changed. There's great value in kids talking to other students and seeing how they think, how they understand a concept, because maybe they can understand that concept in a different way. Really, the most important edge here is changing our thinking about what this is all about when, where, and how learning can happen. We can now talk about not just learning anytime, any place. You're all familiar with that. But what about learning any path, any pace? Can we take students from their interests and get them to higher levels of learning? Can we really personalize learning and say, what are you interested in? Are you interested in the arts? Well, we have ways of getting you to science if you're interested in drawing. That's Pixar in a box. That's so many other ways of integrating across the subject areas. What about varying the pace? What if some kids can learn some things more quickly? What if some kids need more time? I think that's also the potential of technology to help change the pace at which kids learn. Believe me, when I was working at Sesame Workshop, and it was so important to me in my early years of my career, I learned that kids could learn things earlier than we thought. The only problem was we hadn't given them the right experience, the right tools. Sesame Street is now 45 years old, but believe me, in the first few years, there were experts in early childhood who said, that'll never work. How can you use television to teach a 3-year-old letters and numbers? We're having trouble doing that in kindergarten. Now we've shown that, in fact, kids can learn to count in the first season of Sesame Street, to count from 1 to 10, to learn the alphabet. Now the goal in Sesame Street 45 years later is to count from 1 to 40. So we're lifting up how quickly kids can learn and what they can learn earlier. This is our strength here in this country, and this is the redesign of our educational system we're all working on. And you've seen, based on the speakers that have come before, the universities partnering with schools, parents partnering with schools. I'm so pleased there are a number of parents here today. Yeah. Parents are a child's first and most important teacher. Isn't that true? Parents do more in the first 5 years, even before they get to kindergarten, to set them on the right path. And again, if I have time, I will mention the way in which technology can now support the literacy, the biliteracy of kids in their learning, even in the preschool years. We have a great, here in California, we're so fortunate to have a system of informal learning. Museums, libraries, youth groups, church groups that are all supporting our children's learning, helping to surround kids. They're in that short school year, 180 days. Most nations are at 200 days or longer. We can now talk about a new day for learning, a new year for learning that's 24/7, 365. We can also make learning much more authentic. Kids should never be sitting in classrooms saying, why do I have to learn this? What does this have to do with my life? They should always know, yes, they should always know how what they're learning in math. I think that's the most frequently asked question in mathematics is, why do I have to know this? How does this apply to anything? They should never have to know that if we connect up authentic learning. I'll just give you one example of math in everyday life. Every time you're at the supermarket, you're ready to check out, you're looking at 3 or 4 lines, you've got your groceries, you got 10 items, you have 50 items. You see everyone else with how many items they have. You're trying to make a quick calculation about which checkout line to get in. That's algebra. You're trying to figure out how many items you've got, how many items they've got, which line's moving quicker, which are the fast checkout clerks, who's helping to bag. You are very quickly doing a calculation that you could express in an algebraic equation. This happens all the time. Let me also quickly mention the whole child. Howard Gardner, professor of Harvard, 8 ways in which we're all smart. Can we now, and this supports so much of what you care about with multiculturalism, multilingualism, can we now really embrace the whole child and understand there are at least 8 ways in which kids are smart? Not just the first 2, which have dominated instruction, the verbal and the math, but can we understand that the other 6 can help kids get to higher levels in verbal skills and math skills? The visual learners, the musical learners, kids who are good kinesthetically with their bodies, the athletes, the dancers, kids who like to move. All kids love to move. But very quickly in schools we have them sit in chairs, don't we? The intrapersonal intelligence, kids who know themselves well, know their feelings, their emotions, can manage themselves well. The interpersonal intelligence, young people who are good at working with other people, such a valuable skill as they work in the workforce. What about that last intelligence that Howard Gardner discovered later on? If you go to his original book, 30 years ago, Frames of Mind, he talks about 7. Years later, he added the naturalist intelligence, people who are good with plants and animals. So here's what happens. Here's what happens when we only emphasize the first 2. Here lies Frederick Jones, pretty good SAT scores, probably went to a good college. But we are all more than the sum of our test scores, aren't we? So much more. No matter what we publish at Edutopia, month in and month out, new films, new articles, resources, National Pi Day coming up, no matter what we do, every month, this feature, the Multiple Intelligences Quiz, the MI quiz, is one of the top 5 most popular pages on our site. Take 5 minutes. Some of you could do it right now if you want. 24 questions. Very quickly, it'll give you a sense of your multiple intelligences, how you naturally like to spend your time, and then maybe also help you think about how you could develop some of the other intelligences that you're not naturally inclined towards. So, let me show you one example from our website, a film that brings together all of those different intelligences to help kids with their language arts. It's about the arts, and it's about an art form. When I heard about this story from Tucson, Arizona, I said, how does that work? How do you use opera to help kids learn to read and write at 4th grade? Isn't opera something that, first of all, it's expensive. You have to go downtown and dress up, and oh my gosh, it's sung in a foreign language. Isn't it usually sung in Italian or German? How does that help kids learn to read and write in English? So let's take a look at this film.
first graders are learning all about opera. And with the help of professional singers and musicians, they're also becoming writers.
How does Papageno feel in the beginning of the story?
Thrilled.
Yeah.
Very good. And then how do they both feel at the end of our song? It means really, really happy. How do they feel?
Exuberant.
Exuberance. Very good.
At Corbett Elementary School in Tucson, Arizona, the arts enhance instruction in math, reading, writing, science, and social studies.
What words do you use when you're at the end of the story?
Finally.
Finally.
The Arts Infusion program, now operating in more than 44 schools, is called OMA, Opening Minds Through the Arts.
Opening Minds Through the Arts is a program that utilizes the arts to boost student achievement and social growth, one that uses those tools in music, writing, visual arts, and dance to make connections for children that are related to their neurological development and to their social growth.
My donkey low, my donkey high, high, low.
OMA is based on brain research showing that the wiring of the left to the right side of the brain takes place between the ages of 4 and 12, a time when children learn from different forms of stimulation.
Is there something that we're making with ourselves that we're forming? Let's see, Esteban.
A pattern.
A pattern. What kind of pattern are we making?
A high-low pattern.
Maybe.
Music helps kindergarten children learn to listen.
Our very first shape today is a triangle. Hand on your hips. 1, 2.
Dance
Another
helps
triangle.
second graders learn geometry.
Now put your feet apart so you have a triangle in your legs.
Fourth graders study science while learning the violin.
Okay, how does humidity affect our instrument?
It makes the strings stick to the bridge.
And fifth graders express their creativity by composing music.
So now we need something that repeats. A rhythm that would be here, and then it would repeat here.
Opening Minds Through the Arts really is an academic program that infuses the arts. Because we align it with the state standards, it gives another way for the brain to connect to what children are learning. And the more opportunities that children have to have tactile or physical or all of those responses that may be different than what we are used to learning with, the better they learn.
Mein Tür ist verschlossen, ich lass dich nicht ein.
Professional artists from the Tucson Opera, the Symphony, and the University of Arizona teach in each classroom twice a week.
Gute Nacht, gute Nacht, gute Nacht, mein Knab.
We always like to sing things in foreign languages so that it really helps the students to observe, and it puts the second language learners in the same boat as the English-speaking students because it's in a totally different language that no one knows.
Corbett Elementary is a neighborhood school in a working-class section of Tucson. 20% of its students are English language learners.
Like my house is dirty, I have to clean it up.
One of the things that the OMA program does, especially for our English language learners, is provide them with an art form that's connected to learning in a way that they can connect no matter what language they speak.
Does anybody know what this is called when we kind of sing like this? What do we call that in the opera? Recitative. Everybody say recitative.
Recitative.
Get used to it because this is how we're going to compose music when you write your own opera.
The professional artists come in and they just have a wealth of knowledge. But not only do these artists have a firm grasp on their art form, but they're able to come in and create lesson plans that teach these things to the students while also integrating things like language skills and just 21st century skills.
We've learned a lot of things about opera, like subtext and like how terms of opera are used, and you get to use your imagination a lot.
Nice bow in your hair.
It's a really good way of learning because usually when you learn, you just read it out of the textbooks, but when you act out stuff and talk about stuff, it really helps you learn better.
Don't be late. I won't.
I won't.
So then you rush off and you say, good job, dude.
So you get the idea. What's going on here? They're using their bodies to express language. And that young girl says, you know, what is it? What's the word for being really, really excited? And she says, exuberant. Yeah, she knows that word because she knows what it looks like. She knows what it feels like. You see these kids, again, using the multiple intelligences of their bodies to learn. There's the mathematics there. There's the kinesthetic. You see how much these kids want to act out and express language. Sir Ken Robinson has one of the most popular TED Talks in which he says, somehow we've gotten into this curriculum where we think that kids only learn from the neck up. We've forgotten that they have a body, that they need to use their bodies to learn. That's the role of the arts. You saw the mathematics as well, the movement, the collaboration. I want to talk briefly about the curriculum edge. There's so much to be said here, but generally we want to see that curriculum become much more authentic, as I said, moving towards project-based learning. Here's the challenge I'll pose to you, and we're here in San Diego where High Tech High has pushed the hardest on trying to make a complete project-based learning curriculum. Please check out their website and their films. These kids in West Philly, high school students who come from the most difficult circumstances, designed and built an award-winning hybrid vehicle. All of your high school students should be able to do this. If these kids in West Philly can do it, your students can too, if you give them the right experiences, the right mentoring, the right curriculum. That's Simon Hauger. He's a former engineer, he became a teacher, and he taught these kids how to do it. I met Simon about 5 years ago. I said, this is amazing work. There you see the vehicle they designed. It's called the K1 Attack. It's a red sports car. It gets 55 miles per gallon, running on biodiesel. I said, Simon, what do you want to do from here? Do you want to create more projects? Do you want to have your kids go on and work in the automotive industry? He said, actually, I'd like to create a school where the entire school was just full of projects. I said, well, that's a great goal. Last year, I was driving around San Francisco listening to NPR. I heard this report where the first line of the report was, imagine a school where classes are organized not by subject, but by project. And in West Philadelphia, there's such a school called the Workshop School. I said, Simon's done it. He's created that school. It took him 5 years to do it. But if you go to their website, you will see what a school looks like. It's all about authentic project-based learning. A great way to get into this, PBL 101 is through the Buck Institute for Education. They have a conference every June, I believe. What would be better than going to Napa, California and learning about project-based learning? Their handbooks, again, their curriculum, they've been doing this for more than 20 years. The past 5 years, such an explosion of interest in PBL. If you can't get to High Tech High while you're in San Diego, please look at this video of High Tech High students creating a tiny house. They designed and built a green, sustainable house, 100 square feet. Again, your students can do this. This is available on the teaching channel, so just look at teaching channel and tiny house and you'll see these kids doing it. They're learning about sustainability, about design, about construction. Again, a complete integrated project. It's 10 o'clock. I just want to take 5 more minutes of your time. I want to show you 3 minutes of a film from Portland. You're all familiar with, I think, especially kids learning to be bilingual in English and Spanish. What about the other languages? Sometimes as I talk with administrators about Asian languages in particular, I'm trying to do more to encourage better understanding between US and China in particular. I think it's the most important relationship for both countries and for the world these next few decades. You can see ways in which these two countries can collaborate. You can see ways in which things are not going well. So as I've gone around and talked with administrators about Asian languages, they sometimes say, well, those are much more difficult to learn, aren't they? They take like 8 or 9 years, and here we are in elementary school. We couldn't possibly do that. But again, I hope the message you carry from my talk is kids can do this earlier, more quickly, if we give them the right experiences. So just 3 minutes of kids in Portland, Oregon. Look at the looks on their faces as you look at these films. That's something that's very hard to describe in words. You wouldn't believe me if I said it. But when you see these films, you see the look on the kids' faces. That's the look you want. So let's take a look at kids learning Japanese in Portland.
The sights and sounds of Japan are part of the fabric of Portland, Oregon, a city with a world-class Japanese garden and a unique public school language program. Here, students are immersed in Japanese from their first day of kindergarten.
The whole idea of an immersion education is that you are surrounded in the language. You're not teaching the language independent from actual content or real life situation. I think a lot of people in our country have had high school language, and it's a textbook, a reading and writing kind of thing. But immersion means you're in a situation where you have to pay attention to the language in order to be able to do the activity that's going on. Just through routine and copying the teacher, they start developing song vocabulary and other things like that that are part of their real kindergarten world.
First day, it's like what's going on, and then after that, it's, well, this is the way school is. The teacher speaks in a new language, and I try to figure it out. こっち側は先生が歌う。で、こっち側はみんなが歌う。だから、仲良く遊びましょう。大きな栗の木の下で。They're able to use language in all the things they do in school. And when they're washing their hands, when they're drawing on paper, when they're trying to work out a problem with a friend, any of these situations can be situations in which we can insert language and practice language. They don't even realize how special it is.
In Richmond Elementary School's Japanese Language Magnet program, students follow the Oregon State curriculum.
That's fine. Thanks, man.
They study their core subjects in Japanese.
So you at least get the sense that these kids can do it, and you know that they can, if we give them the right experiences, the right kind of classroom. I want to close with mentioning one more website, and that's the Academy of Achievement website. This is a website where some of our most distinguished leaders in business and science and the arts were interviewed to tell their story to students. And sometimes people ask me, well, how did George Lucas, what was he like as a kid? In Modesto, California, most people, those of you who are Star Wars fans, pick up his story when he got to USC Film School. But what was his life like the 20 years before that? In this interview, he talks about the fact that he had a serious car accident before high school graduation. Imagine that you're a teacher of a young, kind of quiet young man in the back who's not doing well in your class. He's not going to college. And you asked him, you know, George, what do you want to do? He says, I'll probably become a car mechanic in Modesto. I like cars. I have my own car. I like fixing my car. And if you probed a little bit further, you might see that he had a darkroom at home. That's the only inkling of who he is today. As a kid, he did like images and photography, but back then it was never anything you could use in the classroom. Again, we're at that period now where we can have all kids who are interested in images and photography, they can use that in their schoolwork. So at that Academy of Achievement website, you'll see many, many stories of very distinguished people, what they were like as kids, and it's very supportive for kids who are struggling because they'll see George Lucas was just like me. I wasn't planning on going to college. After that high school car accident, George decided to do something more with his life. At the age of 18, he discovered he should be doing more. He is one of the most distinguished graduates of the California Community College system. You'll see the interview with Frank Geary. Yeah, some of you are familiar with the community colleges. A great way in for so many kids. Let me just close with this one example. Here's a question. What's your definition of a great school? Edutopia is full of great schools. I was talking with the head of the AASA, the School Administrators Superintendents Association in DC, and Paul Houston said, you've got some great schools here. How do you define a great school? And importantly, how would you measure that if you had a good definition? Think about that for a second. Also, could you make that definition just a sentence or two? In education, we tend to be quite verbal, and we might do a definition of a grade school about, 1,000 words. How about 20 words? I said, well, Paul, in these schools, when you walk in, you can tell it immediately. It's in the school climate. It's the leadership of the school. The teachers work together to plan lesson plans. They integrate across the curriculum. I talked about project-based learning. I talked about cooperative learning. And Paul said, well, that's getting a little long. How would you measure that? I said, well, assessment. We have so far to go in assessments. The tests don't really measure everything. We're working on some new assessments. There's the Common Core. It's coming around. He said, okay. Here's Paul Houston's definition of a grade school. Do the children run in at the same rate they run out? That's it. We could measure this, right? We could have saved ourselves a lot of time and money under No Child Left Behind if we tried to measure this. Because this says something engaging is going on. Kids want to come to school, and at the end of the school day, we've seen this in the schools that we filmed, they're a little slow to leave. The parents are lined up, the kids are working on something, and say, could you wait a second? I'm working on something. We're analyzing some data, we're using technology, we're making a presentation. I want to thank you again for this chance to share this stage with so many amazing pioneers, civil rights advocates for this struggle, and my best wishes for creating more of these kinds of schools for all of California's children. Thank you.
Let's give Milton Chen a big CABE thank you.